I never imagined that the woman who smiled at me on my wedding day would become the person who tried hardest to control my life. When I married Uthan 3 years ago, I believed I was gaining a husband and a family. His mother, Lunda, seemed kind at first. She hugged me during family dinners, told everyone how lucky Uthan was to have found me, and acted like she welcomed me with open arms. But after the wedding, everything slowly changed. The compliments became criticisms. The smiles became judgmental looks. The support became constant interference. At first I told myself it was normal. I thought maybe she was simply having trouble adjusting to her son being married. I tried to be patient. I tried to respect her. I tried to ignore the comments about how I dressed, how I cooked, how I spoke, and how I spent my time. But the more I gave in, the more control she wanted. She always had an opinion about everything. If I bought something for the house, she complained it was a waste of money. If I spent time with my friends, she accused me of neglecting my family. If I worked extra hours, she claimed I cared more about my career than my marriage. Nothing I did was ever good enough. The hardest part was Uthan's silence. Every time his mother crossed a line, he would tell me to ignore her. Every time she insulted me, he would say she didn't mean it that way. Every time I asked him to stand up for me, he would say keeping peace was more important than starting arguments. Over time, I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. One of the few things that gave me a sense of freedom was my car. It wasn't a luxury vehicle. It wasn't expensive, but it represented independence. It allowed me to go where I wanted when I wanted. I drove myself to work, picked up groceries, visited my friends, and took my daughter to the park. It was a reminder that I still had some control over my own life. Lunda hated that. She often made comments about it. She would say things like, "Women these days think they need too much freedom," or "a family should do everything together." Once she even joked that if she had her way, she'd take my keys so I'd stay home more. Everyone laughed, but something about the way she said it made me uncomfortable. Looking back, I should have taken it more seriously. The night before everything happened, we attended a family dinner at Lunda's house. It was one of those dinners that always left me emotionally exhausted. Lunda spent the entire evening criticizing little things: the way I dressed, the way I parented my daughter, the way I organized my schedule. By the time dessert arrived, I was counting the minutes until I could leave. During dinner, Lunda casually asked where I would be going the next day. I told her I had work in the morning and then planned to meet a friend after lunch. Her expression immediately changed. "Again?" she asked. "You spend a lot of time away from home." I forced a smile and said I was simply balancing work, family, and personal time. She shook her head. A married woman shouldn't need so much personal time. The room fell silent for a moment. Uthan stared at his plate. Nobody challenged her, nobody defended me. I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, but I stayed quiet. Later that evening, when we were getting ready to leave, Uthan suggested we leave my car parked at his mother's house and ride home with him because he needed help carrying some furniture the next morning. It seemed harmless, so I agreed. I left my car in Lunda's driveway and thought nothing of it. The next morning I woke up early, got dressed for work, packed my bag and headed outside to pick up my car before driving to the office. As I turned the corner toward Lunda's house, my heart nearly stopped. The driveway was empty. My car was gone. At first I thought I was mistaken. I looked around, expecting to see it parked somewhere nearby. It wasn't there. Panic immediately took over. My hands started shaking. My mind raced through terrible possibilities. Had someone stolen it? Had it been towed? Had there been some kind of misunderstanding? I called Uthan. He didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. Then I rushed to Lunda's front door and knocked. A few moments later, she opened it wearing a robe and holding a cup of coffee. She looked completely relaxed. "Good morning," she said with a smile. "Where's my car?" I asked. Her smile widened slightly. "Safe." I stared at her, confused. "What does that mean?" She stepped aside and casually walked back into the kitchen. I followed her. She sat down at the table as if we were discussing the weather. Then she reached into a drawer and pulled out my car keys. She placed them on the table in front of her but kept her hand over them. "I decided to keep the car for a while," she said. I laughed nervously because I genuinely thought she was joking. "Okay, very funny. I have to get to work. Please give me my keys." She didn't move. "I'm serious." The room suddenly felt colder. "What are you talking about?" I asked. Lunda took a sip of coffee. "You've become too independent." Blinked, unsure I had heard her correctly. "What? You heard me," she said calmly. "You run around whenever you want, work, friends, shopping, visits, you're never home. A family needs structure. Someone has to set boundaries." My heart pounded in disbelief. "This is my car. And I'm keeping it for now," she replied. "It'll be good for you." I stared at her, waiting for some sign that she was joking. There was none. She meant every word. "Lunda, give me my keys." She shook her head. "No," anger started replacing shock. "You cannot take my car." "Actually, I just did. That's theft." She shrugged. "Call it whatever you want. I couldn't believe this conversation was happening. Why would you do this? Her answer was something I would never forget. She leaned forward and said, because when women have too much freedom, they stop listening to their families, and when they stop listening, they become impossible to control. The word control echoed in my mind. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She admitted it openly. She wanted control, she wanted power, she wanted me dependent on her and Uthan. You have absolutely no right to do this, I said. Maybe not, she replied, but somebody has to protect this family. I grabbed my phone and called Uthan again. This time he answered. Relief flooded through me. Finally, I thought, he'll fix this, he'll tell his mother to stop, he'll make her give back the keys. As soon as he answered, I explained everything. There was a long silence, then he sighed. Maybe Mom has a point. I felt as though the floor disappeared beneath me. What? You've been spending a lot of time away lately. It's my job, Uthan. I know, but maybe taking a break from driving everywhere isn't the worst thing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Your mother stole my car. Don't exaggerate. Those two words shattered something inside me. Don't exaggerate, not are you okay? Not Mom, give her the keys, not this is wrong. Instead, he defended her. Tears filled my eyes. I ended the call before he could say anything else. Lunda sat quietly watching me. She looked satisfied. She had won. At least that's what she thought. I left the house trembling with anger and humiliation. I sat on a nearby bench and cried harder than I had cried in years. Every insult, every criticism, every moment Uthan had failed to support me came rushing back. I realized this wasn't really about a car. The car was simply the latest tool. The latest way to remind me that they believed they had power over me. I felt trapped, broken, defeated. There was only one person I could think of calling, my father. He answered on the first ring. The moment he heard my voice, he knew something was wrong. Through tears, I told him everything. I told him about the years of control, the constant criticism, the stolen car, Uthan siding with his mother. I expected him to be angry. Instead, he became very quiet. That silence scared me more than shouting would have. When I finally finished speaking, he asked only one question. Are you safe? I said yes. Another moment of silence followed. Then he spoke in a calm voice that I had heard only a few times in my life. It was the voice he used when he had already made a decision. Stay where you are, he said. I'm coming. A few hours later, a familiar truck pulled into the parking lot. My father stepped out. The moment he saw my face, his expression changed. He didn't ask more questions, he didn't lecture me. He simply opened the passenger door and looked at me. Then he said 6 words that would change everything. Get in, this ends tonight. As I climbed into the truck, I had no idea what was about to happen. But for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The drive to my father's house was quiet at first. I sat in the passenger seat staring out the window while trying to process everything that had happened. My emotions shifted between anger, embarrassment, sadness, and disbelief. Part of me still couldn't understand how Ethan had defended his mother after she openly admitted to taking my car. Another part of me felt foolish for being surprised. Looking back, there had been dozens of moments when he had chosen his mother's comfort over my feelings. I had simply convinced myself that things would eventually improve. My father kept both hands on the steering wheel and said very little. He wasn't a man who reacted emotionally in difficult situations. He preferred facts, patience, and action. The older I became, the more I appreciated that about him. When we finally arrived at his house, he carried my bag inside and told me to sit down. He made tea, placed a warm cup in front of me, and waited. After a few minutes, he spoke. Tell me everything. I looked at him. Everything, he nodded. Not just today, I want all of it. At first I didn't know where to begin, then the words started pouring out. I told him about the comments Linda made after my wedding. I told him about the criticism, the manipulation, and the constant attempts to make me feel inadequate. I explained how she questioned every decision I made and how Ethan always asked me to keep the peace rather than defending me. I talked for hours. Sometimes I cried, sometimes I became angry, sometimes I felt embarrassed admitting how much I had tolerated. My father listened without interrupting. Occasionally he asked a question or clarified a detail, but mostly he simply listened. By the time I finished, it was nearly midnight. He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. This didn't start with the car, he said. No, I replied quietly. It started years ago. He nodded. The car is just the moment she stopped hiding what she was doing. That sentence stayed with me. For years Linda had disguised her behavior as concern, family values, or motherly advice. But taking my car wasn't advice. It wasn't concern, it was control, pure and simple. The next morning I expected my father to call Linda and demand the return of my vehicle. Instead, he surprised me. He did nothing. At least that's what it looked like from the outside. He went about his normal routine. He read the newspaper, he made breakfast, he worked in his home office. It wasn't until late afternoon that I noticed him sitting at his desk reviewing old documents. He looked focused, methodical. "What are you doing?" I asked. He looked up. "Learning." "Learning what?" "Everything I can." I didn't understand what he meant at the time. Over the following days, however, I began to see a side of my father that reminded me why so many people respected him. He wasn't interested in winning an argument. He was interested in uncovering the truth. He started asking questions, not dramatic questions, small questions, careful questions, questions that eventually led to surprising answers. He asked about financial decisions Ethan and I had made. He asked about family events. He asked who handled certain bills. He asked whether Linda ever involved herself in our finances. At first I thought these details were unrelated, then patterns started appearing. One afternoon he showed me a notebook filled with dates and notes. "Look at this," he said. He pointed to several entries. They were all moments when Linda had interfered with important decisions in my marriage. The purchase of furniture, vacation plans, savings goals, childcare arrangements, even medical appointments. Somehow she had inserted herself into every major aspect of our lives. "That's not normal," my father said. "I know," I replied. "No," he said firmly. "You know it's unpleasant. I'm telling you it's not normal." The distinction mattered. For years I had viewed Linda's behavior as difficult but ordinary. My father saw it differently. He saw a pattern of manipulation. As the days passed, he continued digging. Then one evening he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Who usually talks about money in Ethan's family?" I thought for a moment. "Linda, always, pretty much." He nodded thoughtfully. A few days later he received information from someone he knew who had worked with Ethan's family on a business matter years earlier. The details weren't criminal or scandalous, but they were revealing. Linda had a long history of controlling financial decisions within the family. She often convinced others that she was protecting them while quietly ensuring they remained dependent on her guidance. It was her pattern, her method, her way of maintaining influence. Suddenly years of strange behavior began making sense. She wasn't merely overprotective, she needed control. Without it, she felt powerless. The more independence someone gained, the more threatened she became. That explained why she hated my career. It explained why she disliked my friendships. It explained why she constantly criticized my choices. Every step toward independence reduced her influence. One afternoon my father made another discovery. I was helping him organize documents when he found paperwork related to my vehicle. Years earlier, when Ethan and I were struggling financially, my father had contributed significantly toward the purchase. At the time he viewed it as helping his daughter build stability. Because of how the paperwork had been arranged, he still retained records connected to the transaction. He reviewed everything carefully before looking at me. "Interesting," he said. "What?" I asked. "Linda may have made a very serious mistake." He explained that the situation surrounding the vehicle was not nearly as simple as she believed. Certain ownership records and financial documentation created legal complications that she clearly hadn't considered. For the first time since the car disappeared, I saw a faint smile on my father's face. It wasn't the smile of someone seeking revenge, it was the smile of someone who had found leverage. Meanwhile, messages from Ethan continued arriving on my phone. At first he acted annoyed. He told me I was overreacting. He said I should come home. He insisted his mother was trying to help. But as the days passed and I refused to return, his tone began changing. He became worried, then frustrated, then defensive. Finally, he started asking questions. "Why is your father involved?" One message read. I didn't answer. Another message asked if I was planning to embarrass the family. That message made me laugh bitterly. Linda had publicly taken my car, yet somehow I was the one embarrassing the family. The more distance I gained from the situation, the more clearly I saw the manipulation. One evening my father received a phone call from a distant relative connected to Ethan's family. After the conversation ended, he sat quietly for several minutes. "What happened?" I asked. He looked at me. "Your mother-in-law has been telling people a story." My stomach tightened. "What story?" "That you're unstable, that you've become irresponsible, that she took the car because she was concerned about your judgment." I felt sick. "She's lying." "I know." My father paused. "The problem is that she's been telling versions of that story for a long time." Revelation hit me harder than I expected. I suddenly remembered conversations with relatives that had felt strange. Moments when people seemed to view me differently. Times when someone asked if I was struggling or making reckless decisions. I had always dismissed those interactions. Now I understood. Linda had been quietly shaping other people's perceptions of me for years. Not enough to create obvious conflict, just enough to make herself appear reasonable whenever disputes occurred. She had built a narrative, one that painted her as the concerned matriarch and me as the difficult daughter-in-law. My father wasn't surprised. People who need control often prepare the audience before the performance begins, he said. What does that mean? He leaned forward. It means she wanted everyone ready to believe her when the time came. The realization was painful, yet it also strengthened my resolve. For the first time, I wasn't questioning myself. I wasn't wondering whether I had misunderstood events. I wasn't making excuses for Ethan or Linda, I was seeing the truth. Days later, my father finally decided it was time for direct action, but his approach wasn't what I expected. He didn't threaten anyone, he didn't yell, he didn't send angry messages. Instead, he began carefully gathering documentation. Every message, every record, every witness, every relevant detail. He created timelines, organized evidence, verified facts. Watching him work was remarkable. He wasn't acting out of emotion, he was building a case. One evening I asked why he was putting so much effort into this. He looked at me and said something I will never forget. Because people like Linda survive by making others doubt reality, facts remove that advantage. Those words stayed with me. For years I had doubted myself. Every time Linda criticized me, I wondered if she was right. Every time Ethan dismissed my concerns, I questioned my judgment. Every time conflict arose, I blamed myself, but facts told a different story. Facts showed a pattern. Facts showed manipulation. Facts showed control, and facts couldn't be argued away. As my father's investigation continued, another surprising detail emerged. Several family members had experienced similar treatment from Linda over the years. Some had simply remained quiet about it. Others had distanced themselves from the family altogether. One relative described feeling constantly monitored. Another recalled being pressured into major decisions. A third admitted that she had stopped sharing personal information with Linda years earlier because it was always used against her later. Suddenly, my experience didn't feel isolated. It was part of a larger pattern stretching back decades. The woman who had convinced everyone she was protecting the family had actually been controlling it. The realization changed everything. By the end of the second week, my father's notebook had become thick with information. Names, dates, messages, financial records, witness statements, family history, patterns of behavior. Piece by piece, a complete picture emerged. Linda wasn't acting out of love, she wasn't acting out of concern, she was acting out of fear, fear of losing influence, fear of losing control, fear of becoming irrelevant, and that fear had driven her to make a mistake she never should have made. She crossed a line that could not be explained away. She took my car, she openly admitted why. She exposed the very thing she had spent years hiding. One evening my father closed his notebook, looked at me and smiled for the first time since this nightmare began. "I think we're ready," he said. "Ready for what?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair, ready to show everyone exactly who Linda really is. At that moment I realized something important. My father had never been investigating the car. The car was merely the beginning. What he had really been investigating was the truth. And the truth was about to change everything. After nearly 2 weeks of gathering information, reviewing documents, speaking with relatives, and carefully organizing every detail, my father finally decided the time had come to act. During those days, Linda continued behaving as though she had already won. Through mutual family members, I heard she was telling people that I had become emotional and irrational. She claimed I had overreacted to a simple misunderstanding. According to her version of events, she had only been trying to help me focus on my family. The fact that she could describe taking someone's car as a helpful gesture would have been laughable if it hadn't been so insulting. What surprised me most was how confident she remained. She genuinely believed nobody would challenge her. She believed her reputation would protect her from consequences. Most of all, she believed I would eventually come back, apologize, and accept her control once again. She had spent years conditioning everyone around her to accept her version of reality. What she didn't realize was that my father had spent those same years quietly observing people. Unlike Linda, he didn't need attention. He didn't need praise. He simply watched, listened, and remembered. The family gathering was his idea. Instead of creating a dramatic confrontation, he chose something far more effective. He invited several close relatives to his house for what he described as a family discussion. The invitation sounded harmless. He explained that misunderstandings had developed, and it would be helpful if everyone sat together and cleared the air. Because my father was respected by nearly everyone involved, nobody refused. Linda accepted immediately. According to one relative, she seemed excited. She viewed the gathering as an opportunity to present herself as the victim and convince everyone that I was being unreasonable. Ethan agreed to attend as well. By this point, he had become increasingly nervous. The confidence he displayed during the first few days after the car incident had faded. He had started calling more frequently. His messages sounded less certain. I think deep down he knew something wasn't right. He simply wasn't ready to admit it. The evening of the gathering arrived. I was nervous from the moment I woke up. My stomach felt tied in knots. Part of me feared nobody would believe me. Another part feared that they would believe me and everything would fall apart. Regardless of the outcome, I knew there would be no going back after that night. Around 6 o'clock, relatives began arriving. My father greeted everyone politely and invited them inside. The atmosphere felt strange. People smiled and exchanged greetings, but there was an underlying tension in the room. Everyone knew something serious was happening. Nobody knew exactly what. When Linda finally arrived, she entered with the confidence of someone walking into a celebration. She wore an expensive outfit and carried herself with the same superiority I had seen for years. Ethan followed behind her looking exhausted. The moment Linda saw me, she gave me a smile that felt more like a warning than a greeting. "I hope you're feeling better," she said loudly enough for others to hear. "You've seemed very stressed lately." I immediately recognized what she was doing. She was establishing her narrative before the discussion even began. She wanted everyone thinking I was emotional and unstable. Before I could respond, my father stepped forward. "Thank you for coming," he said calmly. "We'll begin shortly." We all moved into the living room. Chairs had been arranged in a circle. A large folder sat on the coffee table in front of my father's seat. The sight of it made me nervous, but it seemed to make Linda curious. She glanced at it several times while everyone settled down. Once the room became quiet, my father stood. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "I invited you because there has been ongoing conflict in this family and I believe everyone deserves the truth." Linda immediately nodded. "I completely agree," she said. "This situation has gotten out of hand." My father looked at her but didn't respond. Instead, he opened the folder. The room became even quieter. "Before we discuss opinions," he said, "I'd like to discuss facts." I noticed Linda's smile fade slightly. My father removed several papers and placed them on the table. Then he began reviewing events in chronological order. He started with the car incident. He explained where the vehicle had been parked. He presented text messages confirming ownership details. He reviewed statements from both me and Linda. Finally, he produced a written summary of the conversation during which Linda admitted taking the vehicle to limit my independence. Linda immediately interrupted. "That's not what I meant," my father nodded. "Then perhaps you can explain exactly what you meant." She opened her mouth but hesitated. For the first time, she looked uncomfortable. "I was trying to encourage family values," she said. "Family values?" my father asked calmly. "By taking someone's car?" Several relatives exchanged glances. The explanation sounded weak even before anyone challenged it. My father continued. One by one, he presented evidence showing a pattern of interference in my marriage. Financial decisions, parenting choices, personal relationships, career opportunities. Each example by itself might have seemed insignificant. Together, however, they revealed a clear pattern. Linda repeatedly inserted herself into decisions that weren't hers to make. Every example showed the same thing, a need for control. As the evidence accumulated, the atmosphere in the room changed. Relatives who initially appeared sympathetic toward Linda began looking uncertain. Others looked shocked. Ethan remained silent. His eyes moved between the documents and his mother. He looked like someone slowly realizing he had been standing on unstable ground for years. Then my father moved to the next section of his presentation. This part surprised even me. During his investigation, he had spoken with several relatives privately. Some had agreed to share experiences of their own. My father read portions of their statements aloud. One relative described being pressured into changing a major life decision because Linda disapproved. Another described years of subtle criticism designed to undermine confidence. A third admitted feeling manipulated whenever they attempted to establish boundaries. As each statement was read, Linda became increasingly agitated. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "People are twisting things." My father remained calm. "Are all of them twisting things?" he asked. She didn't answer. The silence spoke volumes. Then came the moment that changed everything. My father placed a separate stack of documents on the table. "Let's discuss finances," he said. Linda immediately stiffened. I noticed it right away. Her reaction was stronger than before. My father calmly reviewed several situations in which family financial concerns had somehow been blamed on me despite records showing otherwise. He demonstrated how narratives had been created that portrayed me as irresponsible even when evidence showed the opposite. Several relatives looked stunned. One even shook his head in disbelief. The image Linda had carefully built over many years was beginning to crack. Not because of accusations, because of facts. Every claim was supported by records, dates, and documentation. Linda attempted to interrupt repeatedly, but each time my father simply produced another document. Another message, another timeline, another witness statement. Eventually she stopped interrupting because every challenge only created more evidence against her. Then my father addressed the issue everyone had been waiting for. The car. He explained the ownership history and reviewed the documentation connected to the purchase. He carefully outlined why Linda had no authority to take possession of the vehicle. More importantly, he explained the potential legal consequences of removing and hiding property that did not belong to her. The room became completely silent. For the first time all evening, genuine fear appeared on Linda's face. "You wouldn't actually do that," she said quietly. My father looked directly at her. "I wouldn't have to, you chose those actions yourself." The simplicity of his response was devastating. There was no anger, no threat, just truth. Linda looked around the room searching for support. She found very little. Relatives who once defended her now appeared uncertain. Others looked disappointed. Some seemed hurt. The realization slowly spread through the room that the conflict had never been about a car. The car had simply exposed years of behavior that many people had ignored, excused, or failed to recognize. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan spoke. Up until that point he had remained mostly silent. He looked exhausted as he stared at his mother. "Did you really take the car because you wanted to control her?" he asked. Linda immediately looked at him. "Of course not." "Then why did you say it?" he asked. She hesitated. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" he pressed. It was the same question my father had asked earlier. This time, however, it came from her son. Linda struggled to answer. Every explanation sounded worse than the previous one. Family values. Concern, protection, none of it matched her actions. Finally, Ethan lowered his head. I could see the pain on his face. He wasn't just questioning a single event, he was questioning years of assumptions, years of loyalty, years of believing his mother's version of reality. In that moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered every time he had dismissed my feelings. Every time he told me to stay quiet. Every time he chose comfort over courage. My sympathy faded quickly. The discussion continued for another hour. By the end, the atmosphere in the room was completely different from when it began. Nobody was yelling. Nobody was creating a scene, yet the impact was enormous. Linda's authority had disappeared. The confidence she carried into the room had been replaced by frustration and embarrassment. More importantly, people were no longer accepting her version of events without question. They were seeing her clearly. For someone who built power through perception, that was devastating. Eventually, relatives began leaving. Many stopped to speak with me before they left. Some apologized for not recognizing what had been happening. Others admitted they had experienced similar situations. Several offered support. It wasn't dramatic. There were no speeches, no public declarations, just quiet acknowledgements that the truth had finally come out. As the room emptied, Linda stood near the door. She looked smaller somehow. Less powerful, less certain. Before leaving, she turned toward my father. "You planned this," she said. He nodded. "I planned for the truth to be heard." She stared at him for several seconds before walking out. Ethan followed behind her but paused at the doorway. He looked at me. For a moment it seemed like he wanted to say something, an apology perhaps, an explanation. Instead, he simply lowered his eyes and left. After the door closed, silence filled the house. I sat down and released a long breath I felt like I had been holding for years. My father sat across from me. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, I looked at him and asked, "Is it over?" He smiled slightly. "No," he said, "but now everyone knows where it begins." And as I sat there surrounded by the remains of a family gathering that had changed everything, I realized something important. Linda hadn't lost because she was exposed. She lost because she could no longer control the story. The truth belonged to everyone now, and there was nothing she could do to take it back. The days following the family gathering felt strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, I woke up without worrying about what criticism might be waiting for me. There were no surprise phone calls from Linda questioning my choices. There were no passive-aggressive messages disguised as advice. There was no pressure to defend every decision I made. The silence felt unfamiliar at first. I had spent so long living under constant judgment that I didn't know what peace felt like anymore. My father noticed the change before I did. One morning while we were having breakfast, he looked at me and smiled. "You're sitting differently," he said. I laughed. "What does that mean?" He shrugged. "You don't look like someone waiting for permission anymore." His words stayed with me for the rest of the day. He was right. For years I had unconsciously adjusted my life to avoid conflict. I chose my words carefully. I avoided certain topics. I changed plans to keep other people happy. Somewhere along the way I stopped living for myself. The family gathering hadn't solved every problem, but it had exposed something important. I finally understood that I wasn't responsible for managing other people's need for control. Once that realization settled in, everything started changing. My father encouraged me to focus on practical steps rather than emotional battles. Instead of obsessing over Linda's reaction or Ethan's silence, he helped me create a plan for the future. We reviewed my finances, we discussed housing options, we talked about career goals and long-term stability. Every conversation focused on building something instead of fixing something broken. It was a completely different way of thinking. While I was rebuilding my life, Ethan began reaching out more frequently. His messages became longer and more emotional. At first he apologized for not understanding the situation. Then he admitted that seeing the evidence during the family gathering had shaken him. Eventually he confessed something that surprised me. He said that his mother had controlled much of his life as well. Growing up, he never questioned it because it felt normal. She decided which opportunities he pursued, which friendships mattered, and even how he viewed relationships. Whenever he disagreed with her, she convinced him he was being selfish or ungrateful. Reading his messages helped me understand him better, but understanding someone and trusting them are not the same thing. The damage had already been done. Every apology reminded me of the moments when I had begged him to support me and he chose silence. Every explanation reminded me of how alone I had felt. One afternoon he asked if we could meet and talk. After thinking about it for several days, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe across town. When he walked in, he looked older than I remembered. The confidence he once carried had been replaced by exhaustion. He sat down across from me and immediately apologized again. For nearly an hour, he talked about everything he had realized since the family gathering. He admitted he had ignored warning signs for years. He admitted he often chose comfort over courage. Most importantly, he admitted that he failed me when I needed him most. Hearing those words brought a strange sense of closure. For so long I had wanted him to understand. Now he finally did, yet the understanding arrived too late. When he finished speaking, he looked at me hopefully. "Can we fix this?" he asked. I stared at my coffee for a moment before answering. "Some things can be repaired," I said quietly, "but trust isn't one of them once it's broken enough times." The sadness in his eyes was genuine. For a moment I felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the morning I stood outside his mother's house begging for support while he defended her actions. My sympathy faded. We finished our conversation politely and went our separate ways. It wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no emotional scene, just two people acknowledging that the relationship they once had no longer existed. In the weeks that followed, I focused entirely on rebuilding my life. I returned to work with renewed determination. My coworkers noticed the difference almost immediately. I seemed happier, more confident, more focused. Opportunities that I might have ignored in the past suddenly felt exciting. I volunteered for projects. I accepted new responsibilities. I stopped second-guessing myself. As my confidence grew, so did my success. Within a few months, I received a promotion that significantly improved my financial situation. The achievement meant more to me than the salary increase. It represented independence. It represented proof that I was capable of building a future on my own terms. Around the same time, I found a beautiful home for myself and my daughter. It wasn't enormous or luxurious, but it was ours. Every room felt like a fresh start. We decorated together. We picked furniture together. We created new routines together. For the first time in years, our home felt peaceful. My daughter seemed happier too. Children often understand more than adults realize. She no longer witnessed constant tension. She no longer heard criticism disguised as concern. She simply got to be a child. Watching her laugh freely reminded me why I had fought so hard to change my circumstances. My father remained a constant source of support throughout the entire process. He never tried to control my decisions. He never told me what to do. Instead, he gave advice when I asked for it and trusted me when I made choices. The contrast between his behavior and Linda's couldn't have been more obvious. One person believed love meant control. The other understood that love meant support. Several months after the family gathering, I made another important decision. I purchased a new vehicle. Standing in the dealership parking lot holding the keys felt surprisingly emotional. It wasn't about the car itself. It was about what it represented. This vehicle belonged entirely to me. Nobody could use it as leverage. Nobody could take it to teach me a lesson. Nobody could claim authority over it. When I drove home that afternoon, I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't experienced in years. Meanwhile, news about Linda occasionally reached me through relatives. The family gathering had changed more than just my life. Many people had started setting boundaries with her. Some limited contact. Others became less willing to accept her version of events without question. She still tried to influence situations, but her authority had weakened considerably. Once people recognized the pattern, it became difficult to ignore. The control she spent decades building was slowly disappearing. Ironically, she had created her own downfall. If she had never taken my car, many of her actions might have remained hidden. Her desire for control pushed her too far, and that single decision exposed everything. About a year after the incident, a large family celebration was organized for a relative's anniversary. Dozens of family members attended. At first I considered skipping the event. The idea of seeing Linda again didn't appeal to me, but after some thought, I realized avoiding her would only give her power she no longer deserved, so I decided to go. On the evening of the celebration, I carefully got ready and drove to the venue in my new car. My daughter sat beside me chatting excitedly about seeing relatives. As we pulled into the parking lot, I felt calm, not nervous, not angry, just calm. That alone felt like a victory. When I stepped out of the car, several relatives greeted me warmly. Conversations flowed easily. People asked about work, my daughter, and our new home. The evening felt surprisingly enjoyable. Then I saw Linda. She was standing near the entrance speaking with a small group of relatives. For a brief moment our eyes met. Time seemed to slow. I expected to feel anger. Instead, I felt nothing. She wasn't a source of fear anymore. She wasn't a source of anxiety. She was simply a woman who had spent years trying to control others and ultimately failed. As I walked toward the building, I noticed her gaze shift toward my car. She stared at it for several seconds. Then she looked back at me. The expression on her face was difficult to describe. It wasn't just disappointment, it was realization. She understood exactly what she was seeing. The woman she tried to control was standing confidently in front of her, living independently, succeeding professionally, and raising a happy child. Everything she tried to prevent had happened anyway. The difference was that she was no longer part of it. Throughout the evening, Linda remained unusually quiet. She wasn't surrounded by admirers the way she once had been. She wasn't directing conversations or controlling the atmosphere. Most people treated her politely, but the unquestioning loyalty she once enjoyed was gone. Respect built on fear and manipulation rarely survives exposure. At one point, I stepped outside for some fresh air. A few moments later, my father joined me. We stood together overlooking the parking lot. My new car sat under the lights a short distance away. After a moment, he smiled. "Nice car," he said. I laughed. "I like it." He nodded. "You earned it." We stood quietly for a few seconds before I spoke. "Do you ever think about that day?" I asked. "Which day?" "The day you picked me up." He smiled again. "Sometimes." I looked at him. "You really changed my life." He shook his head. "No, I reminded you that you could change it yourself." Typical dad. Even after everything, he refused to take credit, yet I knew the truth. Without his support, I might have remained trapped for years. He gave me something more valuable than advice. He gave me perspective. He helped me see that I deserved better. As the evening continued, people gradually began leaving. Before heading home, I said goodbye to several relatives. While walking toward the parking lot, I noticed Linda standing alone near the entrance. For a moment, I considered simply walking past her. Then she spoke. "You look happy." The words caught me by surprise. I turned and looked at her. For the first time since I met her, she sounded sincere. "I am," I replied. She nodded slowly. Neither of us said anything else. There was nothing left to discuss. No argument to win, no lesson to teach, no power struggle to continue. The battle had ended long ago. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and drove away. As the venue disappeared in my rearview mirror, I realized something important. The sweetest revenge had never been exposing Linda. It wasn't watching her lose influence. It wasn't seeing relatives question her behavior. The sweetest revenge was building a life so full of peace, confidence, and happiness that her control no longer mattered. She took my car because she wanted me dependent. She wanted me small. She wanted me afraid of making my own choices. Instead, her actions pushed me toward freedom. They forced me to recognize my worth. They gave me the courage to create a better future. In the end, she lost the very thing she fought hardest to keep, control, and I gained the very thing she tried hardest to take away, independence. As I drove home with my daughter beside me and my future ahead of me, I smiled, not because I had defeated anyone, but because I no longer needed to. The life I built for myself was victory enough, and that was something nobody could ever take away from me again.